One of the most important aspects to really get down really early is incident response.
Incidents will happen. It's inevitable. But how we can maintain business operations while bad stuff is happening?
Because we honestly don't believe anything is going to happen to us until it does.
Some companies are, one big ransomware away from failing.
And when those self-same companies, and I have seen it, actually have an incident, it all goes to pot within the first 5 minutes.
What happens, if you can't get a hold of CEO at 1 a.m., but you need to make decisions, you need to be able to spend money.
You basically told the customers that they've lost all the names, addresses, basically everything that can be utilized in order to mimic who they are and do some identity fraud.
Media portraying different things for clickbait can skew an opinion.
People were so focused on the problem and not focused on fixing it. They were spending insane amounts of money and nothing actually happened.
You never want to run through an incident response scenario first time when the real thing happens.
Oh my God, that gave me more insight into psychology than I've ever had at any other point in my career.
Sometimes struggle is necessary to build the character, to build the resilience.
So in order to talk about one of the most important aspects of InfoSec, I have trawled the interwebs. He's appeared on the podcast a number of times. Fantastic resource. He's got some great posts. Please go and check him out on LinkedIn. I'll let him kind of tell you a little bit about himself and promote some of the content that he's doing. But I brought him on board. Let's talk about incident response. Marius, for those who have been living under a rock and haven't seen your posts on LinkedIn, do you want to kind of just let everybody out there know who you are, what you do?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for having me, Jim. I guess, first of all, I'm a CISO by day, currently working at FinTech. Also run a vCISO practice, trying to help smaller businesses to kind of remove cyber risk uncertainties. But recently, I've been boasting and talking a lot about how, companies don't want security. They want appearance of security, and they play into security theater. We've been talking the common themes that cyber leaders currently face in terms of board, executive support, how, security is disguised as compliance requirements. So it felt like, there's a lot of support for the messages. I think an important side quest, which I'm kind of currently really excited about, is we are, with my partner, we're building a course, cybersecurity leadership course. But, aside from all the, technical jargon, we're actually talking about how to communicate, how to translate cyber risk to the boards, how to, preempt negative cybersecurity bias. There's a lot of information from my posts that have been drawn out into similar problems that currently CISOs face and how we can equip them with the right weapons to remove stress, to improve their career, prospects, and actually get cybersecurity support. So looking forward to see how this is going to shape up and how it's going to look and hopefully transform a lot of people's careers.
Fantastic. I mean, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, the reason why we do this is to help those up-and-coming CISOs, those up-and-coming InfoSec people, to not fall into the traps that we fell into in our early career. I mean, I've been doing this now for 30 years, and I must admit, 30 years ago, there was a lot less information on how to do this kind of stuff than there is now. I mean, I released my own book 2 years ago, and that's been doing fantastically. But I think it's brilliant what you're doing. But we are here to talk about what happens when all of your security countermeasures are bypassed or fail, or some idiot within an organization decides to do something that they haven't told you about and have caused the one thing that no business really wants to experience, which is an incident. I have always said to anybody I've mentored, anybody I've spoken to outside of InfoSec, and so one of the most important aspects to really get down really early is the incident response piece within your security function within the business. Why? Because at some point you're going to have one.
Yep.
You can't escape it. It's going to happen. Now, hopefully it'll be a small one. but you do get the big ones from time to time. So, I mean, incident response, what are your views on where it is at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's still a lot probably to be desired for. It's a piece that can't be neglected, as you rightly said. So, but the one thing important is, I think sometimes we can write policies, we can write documents that look amazing on paper, but not necessarily meet the reality in practice. Because the most important thing I always say is, you never want to run through a incident response scenario first time when the real thing happens. So you want to be practiced, you want to be, tested, and you want to understand that incident response, policy or document that you have developed. It's a framework and it's a sort of guide. You don't necessarily need to do it step by step, but you need to build a muscle memory of understanding how to do things. You never want to scramble the last minute when you are actually in the incident itself. Even sometimes various incidents will have different guises and different challenges that you might face. So running through those tabletop scenarios, I think it's an important thing to walk through all of the possibilities and understand, what happens if you got the policy, 365 and 365 is not accessible. Do you have a copy of it, elsewhere? Just simple things sometimes that people never even preempt or think about is you need to be ready for all eventualities.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. And I see a lot of organizations, or I've seen a lot of organizations over the years, and I continue to see it now, where you kind of approach the subject matter of, incident response. Maybe it's part of an audit, part of a PCI audit, or just a general discussion. And everybody kind of looks at you and, you see the poor InfoSec professional usually kind of going, I've been trying to say this a few times now to a few people, but that people don't make themselves available. C-suite members don't see the point in their valuable time being taken up to, undertake wargaming, that kind of stuff. So, and when those self-same companies, and I have seen it, actually have an incident, it all goes to pot within the first 5 minutes because they haven't established the chain of command. They haven't established a standard way of working. One of the most important pieces I see, there's not the trust sometimes from, if it's a particularly bad incident, like a really high-end incident, that the C-suite have got the trust that the InfoSec professionals can actually deal with it. And they try to kind of deal with it in a ad hoc fashion. And inevitably, let's be honest, it does tend to go pretty awry at that point. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes, we've seen a lot of examples, in the headlines. We keep talking about, the impact of cyber incident. Yes, it can obviously cost a lot of monetary value. It can damage your reputation and things like that. But there are good ways to respond to an incident and there are bad ways to respond to an incident. And sometimes, good ways actually can get a lot of benefit. People will rally around you and help you and support you. But if you haven't established, ways of working through an incident, establishing things like who's going to make decisions. Because, for example, if you are a CISO and you assume, the leadership role during an incident, you need to be able to make decisions quick. So having that escalated authority during an incident is an important thing to establish beforehand. What happens, if you can't get a hold of CEO at 1 a.m., but you need to make decisions, you need to be able to spend money. I'll give you a very great example. We've been talking about war stories, about incidents, and one of the dear friends who had a really massive incident for one of the massive organizations, without naming them, but they had to create an incident response plan against ransomware. But the biggest struggle that they had was they needed help and support from external parties. He needed to hire about 200 people within, hours. Now, again, if anyone's been, hiring people, there are steps to go through and budgets to get approved. And obviously, the most important thing that he established from that in the next, command chain was ability to get access to funds. So he had, in his incident response process, he had access to, for example, £2 million and ability to hire people and sign contracts himself within an hour's notice. Because, you can't have 200 people sitting in a warehouse waiting to sign a contract and start doing digital forensics and investigation of an incident when time is of the essence.
Very true. Very true. And it's an important aspect, actually, that I see a lot of people doing the wargaming and what have you, but they don't take into account that there are situations where you've got to be able to trust that your CISO or whoever is, chairing the incident, as you quite rightly say, it may need access to funds outside of the standard way of doing it. Do you have an emergency fund? I think there's a lot of firms that don't, to be fair. There's a lot of really good ways to do incident response, but there's even more ways to do it really badly.
A really good incident response versus really bad one will determine the losses, the time you're going to get back to serving your customers. We've seen, incidents taking, months sometimes on end until businesses are able to get back to operating services. And that's, I think, the crucial bit here is that they might have had great incident response, but that incident response was, on paper. Do you actually test? Because especially, big organizations, they have legacy systems, they have some server that's, held by matchsticks and nobody's ever touched it and understands what it takes to recover, rebuild. And that's the real tricky answer sometimes to get answer and to actually be able to test, because nobody wants to touch it. It's really difficult to nail it right, but I think, as you say, you kind of build, I guess, a muscle memory by continuously practicing, by continuously asking the right questions and testing and making sure that you are prepared.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, for those C-suite members who are potentially watching this video, what support do you think they can give to the CISO? Because let's be honest, they've got to at some point, if it's a really bad incident, not step aside, but be a part of that team, not necessarily at the forefront of it, but being, supportive of it, be it especially things like the finance director, the CEO, and comms. Good example, PR. I see a lot of really bad PR being done during an incident. We take the security of our customers really seriously. Right. Everybody's been saying that, and you've just had a really big incident where you've basically told the customers that they've lost all the names, addresses, basically everything that can be utilized in order to mimic who they are and do some identity fraud. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you see a lot of the C-suite, the heads of a company unwilling to step aside to a certain extent for the short period of time for the benefit of their own organization?
Yeah, I think the problem is that obviously, CEO and executives, and they want to be involved and they want to make decisions. But sometimes, during an incident, CISO is experts in that field. So lean on their expertise, trust them to make the right decisions instead of, I'm sure most of us been in, an incident where, people require updates, whether it's couple of hours, 4 hours, that detracts from dealing with the actual problem. So sometimes, establishing the boundaries and making sure that you sometimes even as a CISO, you need to be aware and understand how you can create that delegation and actually set the correct timescales on when you're going to give an update. Because sometimes, managing that relationship during an incident can be really tricky and can really detract you from doing the work that needs to be done. And it's important, even sometimes, simple things, we overlook, but, establishing a rotation of people, looking after people, supporting them, during an incident, yes, people can work 24 hours or, but it's going to be detrimental if that's going to continue. So establishing rotation and making sure people go away from the computer, go to sleep, away, from the office, establishing communication cadence, and obviously communicating far and wide, whether it's PR, whether it's, comms and stuff like that, what information can be shared, what can't be shared, and how to do it properly. It's really important things, as you say, because really bad ones can do a lot of damage.
Absolutely. I mean, comms for me is especially on the really high-end incidents where there's a lot of customers involved or a lot of third parties involved or affected by it. I mean, look at SolarWinds, for instance, that, some of the higher end ones do require a level of communication that, quite frankly, I mean, the security team and maybe the IT teams and all the rest of it are really busy trying to get things back up and running. They're trying to work out what needs to be done. And being able to hand that over to, say, a PR agent or some kind of, comms individual who can then do that relevant communications and keep that outside of our purview for the moment. Obviously, we've got input into it. They're going to want to know, well, what can we say? Yeah. But at the same time, they are the masters of communication, as great as some of us are, and you're a fantastic comms person. But look at it this way. If you're in the middle of an incident, do you really want to be writing something for the potential customers? It's like, well, no, actually, I'm right in the middle of trying to figure out what's going wrong and how to deal with it. And I think the supportive function as well, one of the best incidents I ever was involved in, we were a little bit worried about the C-suite because it was at a time when, let's be honest, InfoSec people were usually under IT. They kind of still are a lot these days, but you didn't have access to kind of that C-suite level. And there was a particularly big incident with a banking institution very early in my career. The Japanese CEO was fantastic. He put the communique across to the UK side and got the HR director to pull out the credit card and say, what do you need for your team to operate? Mm-hmm. We'll bring you in food. We'll sort you out with hotel rooms if needs be. Like you say, there's a rotation because, I mean, you push a human being to 24 hours and you'll start to see them starting to break, especially under high pressure. Exactly. So the ability to be able to cycle people in, cycle people out. And I think there's a lot of pressure quite often you see with, moving back to it with people at high levels going, what's happening? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? Every 5 minutes, it's like, stop, just support us in what we're doing and we'll make sure the company survives it. Is that fair?
The good comms, not only the good comms, but the good support of your customers and potentially those who lost data. I've seen great examples. For example, I don't remember which company, but they, after the data breach, they offered fraud support services of potential people who might lose their data, who might someone steal or try to reuse their data elsewhere. It's an amazing piece to build trust and when times are being tested, your character and resilience are really going to be tested. And whether you're going to come out like a phoenix, shining, or you're going to crumble and do some really bad stuff. And we've seen, sometimes, we've been talking, and I think one of the posts I mentioned, and some are, who do things right can come out on the better end. Cybersecurity changed to me. I kept talking, 2010s was about perimeter sort of security. We wanted to prevent everything. I think 2020s are about incidents will happen. It's inevitable. But how we can maintain business operations while bad stuff is happening. And we need to build resilience into operations. I've been talking about chaos engineering for a long time, but I think, people still are far behind it to actually being able to test bad things, whether it's attacks, whether it's, failures in the systems, and actually continue to support our customers. As I mentioned earlier, about security theater, I think, it can't be neglected. Any security incident has a potential of downtime. And, if you can quantify that downtime, it's a big risk to be had. So it's very important to call out and make executives understand what's at stake here, and how and what support do we need in order to be prepared and support the business.
Yeah, and it is interesting because, I mean, we're moving now into the how do we educate, the high-end people within an organization what it's like to go through an incident, because I mean they've probably experienced business interruptions before, but very few people have experienced full-on cybersecurity issues, be it a high-end ransomware attack, that kind of stuff. And I think gaming is a great way of kind of educating them, and we do it ourselves within the business. One of the things that we've done for not only our customers but for Razorthorn as well is we throw in incidents that aren't what you would traditionally do. I see a lot of incident response things where they do what if this server goes down. It's all very tech centric, but we did an incident where I died. That was it. Mm-hmm. I passed away, And my entire management team and all the people within the business had to then deal with it. Decision-making gone, high-end people gone. Problems, obviously, you can't sort out bank mandates or change bank mandates because, you've got to go through a whole legal process when somebody passes away to make sure power of attorney and authority goes elsewhere. Yeah. And it was really, really telling because it allowed them to understand a lot more about how the business runs and where the single points of failure are. And I think, do you think that's quite useful for people when they're doing their wargaming to make sure that they throw in incidents that are maybe very, very different from the traditional ones to teach the rest of the business that, look, there are stuff that can happen which you would never think would happen. Let's just say all your C-suite are down a restaurant and somebody accidentally poisons the fish, and you end up with an entire management team who are all currently in hospital. Stuff like that. Is that the kind of stuff that you recommend for people? Is that what you see a lot of?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I said, even earlier, you have to test the eventualities and scenarios where, even though you think it's the wildest dream, but you never know. As I mentioned before, the power for a CISO to make decisions. Now, it's, same thing can happen. And I'm not sure most businesses have established, for example, rules. But there could be an incident that the whole C-suite is on a plane traveling somewhere for the next 6 hours, and you can't get hold of anyone. So can you make decisions? Can you get funds? Can you get approvals during an incident and actually get some work done instead of fiddling your thumbs for the next 6 hours until the plane lands? So, it's really crucial to kind of test and understand those situations and make it clear for executives, even sometimes explaining a simple thing, phishing exercise is one thing, but having ransomware when systems are encrypted and unusable, rebuilding exercise is not an easy one that could be done overnight. Yes, in the cloud, it's much easier, but with the legacy systems, you need to be able to purchase the new hardware. In some cases, if you need to rebuild systems, having access to funds, having access to people who are able to do it, it could be really tricky. And it's important to test those unusual situations and walk through scenarios where, we can test all eventualities and understand how and what needs to be established in order to be able to operate.
Absolutely. I mean, moving on to a couple of things, there's so much to unpack with incident response. It's one of those things where there's a lot of possible what ifs. And I mean, whenever I used to do wargaming scenarios years and years and years ago, rather than now, one of the actual scenarios I would put in place is a pandemic. And everybody would laugh at me. Everybody laughed at me. What? Oh, well, that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, it did.
Well, yeah, exactly.
One of my favorite stories is like, I love all kinds of weird stuff. I like to go to the Y-files and what have you and look at all the weird conspiracy theories and aliens and stuff like that, paranormal. I love all this stuff. One of the most interesting things I've ever heard about when it comes to wargaming. Wargaming is a really important part, I think, of testing your incident response. But you've got to throw scenarios at it. And it's not about creating a playbook for that exact incident, in my view, because no incident goes exactly the same. No two ransomware attacks are the same. No two sort of systems going down happens in the same way. Obviously, when power outage occurs, that kind of happens in the same way, but you don't know what systems and services are necessarily going to be affected. No. So sometimes you've got to throw in a hypothetical. And one of the best ones I ever heard about is the US military, who do a lot of wargaming, and they're well known for it. And we can learn a lot from the military about how to do the wargaming, because they did one, and they actually have a playbook on a zombie apocalypse.
Okay.
And a lot of people say, well, why are they doing that? That's never going to happen. It's like, yeah, but guys, it's not about that. It's about thinking outside the box. It's about training people to make difficult decisions, training people to think in specific ways that can facilitate what needs to be done. So, yeah, you can wargame a zombie apocalypse and people will poo-poo it, but it's like, actually, it's a really good scenario in certain cases to be able to just test how your team operates. What rules do you put in?
Yeah.
a plane crashing on a desert island. It doesn't have to be a zombie apocalypse. It's like, how do we operate when times are hard? And I love that.
No, exactly. And I think sometimes in a way, I've been deeply involved into kind of, via TikTok and YouTube, helping people to whether transition into cybersecurity, whether it's AI with this new generation. It might sound harsh, but I think in a way we're kind of losing critical thinking aspects and people being able to, be curious. Like I'll give you, a common question I get is, can you coach me cybersecurity from zero to whatever? Or can you give me the full roadmap? And, I harshly say to people, cybersecurity is not for you. Because the current, with this generation, or I get a lot of people who expect things to be given on a plate and coach them and train them from day zero to everything, I say to people, the most important skill in cybersecurity is curiosity and being able to get off your behind and actually do something and find out. As you earlier mentioned, we live in a world currently that the abundance of information that's free on your fingertips is like nowhere before. 20 years ago, going into cybersecurity was a completely different journey where it was really hard to find information and learn things. Whereas now, when you have YouTube, you have all kinds of stuff that is for free. You got Professor Messer doing all the CompTIA courses. You got amazing guy, Network Chuck, doing, all the networking stuff. There is an abundance of information. You just need to get off your behind and do the research, or even people saying, I want to work in cybersecurity. Well, what do you want to do in cybersecurity? If you can't even research what each role does and what role you want to do, cybersecurity is not for you. So, I think it's critical, and testing those abilities where you allow people to, think through scenarios. And again, a most important thing I always say as well, even in my kind of leadership style, is I don't want to give people orders. I want to tease out information from people and get to see how people think through different scenarios. Instead of saying, do this, I would say, well, how would you do that in this scenario? What's your thinking, framework? How would you find the correct answer? Where would you look for correct answer? That's way more important than telling people, just do this.
And you're touching on a really important point here, cohesion and trust, as well as adaptability. I mean, I get a lot of similar questions from people. What are the key things about InfoSec that you think are really, really important? And I've going to mention them in my book myself. Communication for a start. If you can't communicate, you're kind of knackered, really.
Yeah.
Especially during an incident, because everybody will want to know what's going on and where they currently are. But adaptability as well. There's no hard and fast rule of what to do in InfoSec in general. Yes, there's defense in depth. Yes, there's risk management. Yes, there's all kinds of things that are time-honored traditional aspects of InfoSec. But even when you look at things like risk management, there's no hard and fast methodology of doing it. There's, in my opinion, some very good ones, and in my opinion, some very bad ones. But you've got to be able to facilitate and adapt whatever is going on. Let's look at technology. Let's just look at that alone, right? I was there during the Y2K incident. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, that gave me more insight into psychology than I've ever had at any other point in my career, bar one or two other moments where people were so focused on the problem and not focused on fixing it. They were spending insane amounts of money to have people just sat there over the Y2K sort of crossover. Yeah. I mean, I know people who were making hundreds of thousands of dollars and pounds just sat there eating a pizza that had been provided to them, watching the fireworks go off over the, from the office. Yeah. And nothing actually happened. And there was a whole subset of people leading up to it saying, look, yeah, okay, it was a bit of an issue, but we fixed a lot of this stuff. Nothing is going to happen. Yet the world went insane. And I think it did more damage to incident response than a lot of people either have considered. Because like after the big non-entity that was Y2K, where I think there was like one office block somewhere in the Middle East that went down and, a power station that was offline for 10 minutes. Everybody turned around and went, well, why bother? Most incidents will be nothing.
Yeah.
And then it happens to you. I mean, the human being and the human condition is interesting because we honestly don't believe anything is going to happen to us until it does. You could cross the road and never get run over a million times and think, I'm never going to get run over because I know how to cross a road. And then that one time you're in the wrong place at the wrong time and boom, you're gone. And it's the same in business with security. Or am I talking complete nonsense?
No, absolutely. But I just want to call out one important aspect here. And I think that especially this day and age, even, as you say, 2000s was troublesome, but nowadays is even more troublesome that media portraying different things for clickbait can skew an opinion, very quickly. And people sometimes are unable to do their own research and ascertain what's true and what lies is on how things have been glorified and changed to, fit the specific media narrative. And all of a sudden, we have people fearful for, same as now happening, AI is being touted to replace all of the human, and cybersecurity employees. We got all kinds of stuff, out there in the media that people are really fearful about. And it's really tricky, and as I say, it's another just kind of lean into people's psychology and people trust. And I hope that's slowly moving away from media trust. But then again, we are, in a way, probably even leaning in towards a worst case scenario because we are trusting now social media where anyone can make up some wildly inaccurate post and, people will believe it because, all of a sudden they have a big following. So it's important to have voices in the industry who can, cut through the noise, cut through all of the nonsense that's currently happening, and actually overview and correct sometimes the narrative that's been given to us. I think it's an important thing. And people really need to be able to, or really need to think critically and be able to verify what they're reading and make an opinion for themselves instead of, I've been constantly talking about how the whole cybersecurity industry is kind of skewed because people have been taught to spend more money on fixing more problems, more solutions. And, and people just continuously are firefighting instead of actually trying to understand how we can fix the root cause and actually properly prevent things from happening in the future. And, it's still a big lesson that only people who've been around the block for a long time can do.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I've just literally done a Razorwire Raw episode. It's the new kind of 15-minute videos I do. I try to release them on a Thursday about current events, current thoughts, and all the rest of it. And I've just done a piece on private equity and VCs have been driving up the cost of security and tools to the point where we can't afford InfoSec professionals in any decent number to be able to facilitate business. But that's another content piece. And weirdly enough, I do want to talk to you on another podcast about that. But I just want to pick up on something that you mentioned earlier on, mindsets. Now, you and I have been around the block a few times. Let's be honest. We come from a different generation, and you hear a lot of people saying about generational differences and all the rest of it. One of the things that really concerns me about maybe the next generation of InfoSec people is their own resilience. And I've talked about it in burnouts and all the rest of it. I see a lot more youngsters getting more and more anxious about making decisions or making decisions that might come back and bite them and affect them. And sometimes we do have to do that as InfoSec professionals. When you might make the wrong decision. It might be right, or you might think it's right at that time, but it might end up being wildly wrong, and you just have to recover from that. But are you worried that the next generation of InfoSec people are going to be more hesitant to deal with a situation as best as they can for fear of, fallout, not only for their career, but obviously for themselves mentally? Is that something that you're concerned about?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Obviously, I think sometimes, I don't want to lean into the narrative that the new generation is doing. We got some great, amazing people growing up. But I think the problem is, and I kind of, the phrase often rings in my head that, tough times create tough people, easy times create weak people. And I think sometimes it's probably even parents' fault, because obviously if parents grew up through tough times, they want to support their kids with everything to make sure that they never need to struggle with anything. But sometimes struggle is necessary to build the character, to build the resilience. And I think it's important. And that's why, what I said earlier about, expecting things to be given on a plate. I keep pounding the information that you need to graft, you need to be able to be curious, you need to have aptitude and the ability to learn. I always talk, I lived the experience, that's why I always say to people, I don't think you need to go to university because, 3 years in university, I landed my first cybersecurity job via self-learning after 8 months. You can short circuit that path. But I spent 3 to 4 hours on the days I had time to study. And, it's not going to be easy, but know what you're doing and keep persevering. And similar things, in incident response, things are not going to be easy, but you have to do the hard yards. You mentioned about communication, you mentioned about, skills and influence. You need to be able to influence executives, the boards, the necessity of continuously test and adapt, evaluate, and ask difficult questions, because you never want to be in a situation where you're asking those difficult questions during the real thing. So the better prepared you are, the easier the thing's going to be. And as you said, it's not about building a very prescriptive documentation. It's about having the framework. It's about having the right, sometimes, and even creating 2 documents, one for specifically for incident response, but other one, which is kind of more of a framework for crisis management, where you call out sort of the main pathways of how things are going to happen, who's going to be able to make decisions, where you're going to have funds, who can override who and what. It's an important thing to establish in a business.
There's 2 aspects that have really changed my opinion over the many, many years that I've been doing this. Some were very early on in my career. Some came a little bit later. But the 2 main aspects of incident response that I kind of appear to. One is a saying: when going through hell, keep going. When it's bad, and it will get bad, don't lie down, because you're going to get burnt alive and you're not going to reach the end. You have to keep going, no matter how painful it is. Maybe it's painful decision-making. Maybe at the end of it, you think you're going to get finger-pointed as being the reason why the incident happened because you didn't communicate correctly in the first place. Don't let that hit you in the face. Just keep focusing on getting to the end point. When going through hell, keep walking. And the other thing that taught me a hell of a lot about incident response, and it sounds a bit weird, but I always say to people when I teach people or mentor people about incident response, go and read historical accounts of difficult situations. So a good example, I found out a few years ago that one of my family members on the Welsh side was at Rorke's Drift. He was one of the survivors of Rorke's Drift. So I kind of went back and read the accounts and all the rest of it. And then when my grandfather passed away, he actually survived Changi Jail during World War II, one of the most brutal, horrendous places to be put.
Yeah.
And we found his diary. We didn't know he had one, but he had a diary written in pencil. We had to really work to get it back to a readable format. And there is stuff in there that you would never want a human being to go through. But what was really changing for me, because I was an InfoSec professional when I started reading it, was some of the things that they had to do, the decision-making they had to make, some of the situations that they'd found themselves put in, and they still managed to survive at the end of it, which is great. And why does that matter? We're talking about incident response in commercial aspect. So hopefully you're never going to be put in a Changi jail and then, beaten and, starved. But it's about the human condition to be able to figure out what you need to do to make things better, to get things fixed, to get things back. When bad things happen in your own life, you go through your own process to fix those things. Hopefully you do. Anyway,
Yeah.
It's the same thing with incident response. It's just you just need to get in, you need to get it done. And I think that's a really interesting aspect of what we do. Don't just look at security incidents. Look at other kinds of incidents, other kinds of situations all throughout history. We have a wealth of knowledge of when things have gone horribly, horribly wrong, and people have had to think outside the box to get them right again. I mean, there was the Challenger situation. Houston, we have a problem where it's like, okay, we've got this. and we
Yep.
have to somehow survive using what we have only here. Do you think that's an effective way of helping those juices flow on incident response and kind of training people up and getting people thinking in the right way?
Yeah, absolutely. I always say to people, reading and learning and walking through someone else's experience is an invaluable lesson, because you're always going to learn, what people done, how they've done it, and there's always something to take from that. But just to add to that, the one thing I'll mention and how another way to kind of get to the same point is, I always say to security professionals, probably very early in your career, what you know is very important. As the senior you get, who you know becomes way more important. So, and I always say cybersecurity is an amazing industry because how it supports its community. So whether incident response, whether anything else, cast and build as wide network as you can, because the people going to rally and gather and support, and going to really help you and talk through scenarios, go to networking events, build a LinkedIn. I always say, do as much as possible in that space, because you never know which connection is going to help you, which story is going to resonate, and how this is going to help you. But it's really important, especially as you climb towards leadership. It's really invaluable, and I've seen firsthand how I've got a great friend who's in a drinks business, and there's probably two biggest companies in the world that own probably 100% of the brands, and he says even though they are our biggest competitors, I will be the first one to message them and offer my support, because if they hit, we're going to be the next. And it's you don't really see that in probably any other industry, how supportive of each other people are. So build a network, expand your knowledge, learn from people, go to events where people share their war stories, their incident responses, their practices. It's always going to be really helpful learning, because once you get to that leadership level, people always ask, how did you become a CISO? Well, there is no course, there is no magic blueprint to become a leader. You're going to learn from people around you who walked in the same shoes, done the same path. That's really going to be helpful for you.
And you draw upon a very, very important point, and one of the things that I really like about the InfoSec community myself is you can just reach out to people within your network. If you're in the middle of an incident and you need some info, maybe somebody has dealt with it before, maybe you just need to soundboard off against somebody, then you can do that. I mean, I've been reached out to many times with people who are in difficult situations, and I've said, right, well, let's work through the problem. Let's just sit down and work through it. I can't sort it for you, but I can help you in my own way.
Yeah.
And I do love that about the community. You're absolutely right there. And let's face it, when it's hit the fan, sometimes you need to just call up somebody who's also experienced something similar and go, dude, is it always this bad? Yes, it is, mate. Let's go for a pint when you've sorted it, and we'll, and we'll commiserate. But it's a really good point there, Marius. I really, really like that one. Marius, it's been absolutely fantastic sitting down and gaining the wisdom from, your experiences and with what you've been doing and all the rest of it. I really, really appreciate it. And hopefully everybody out there as well does. To you out there, thank you ever so much for watching our Razorwire podcast. We've had a hell of a lot of people reaching out and saying how much they like it and all the rest of it. We have been hit by some weird algorithm change recently, so please like and subscribe if this is the kind of content that you like, and reach out if you want us to talk about something, you want me to bring somebody on board and sit down and have a discussion. We can do that as well. But our time has finished now. So thank you very much, Marius, and thank you to everybody out there. We'll be seeing you again soon.
As always, a pleasure, Jim. Thank you for having me.